As we close in on the release of the Elden Ring DLC, I wanted to throw a theory out there that came to me about the Two Fingers. It was originally sparked by the opening scene, which I believe depicts Marika becoming a god and a vessel for the Elden Ring. Today, I want to dive into why I believe that the Two Fingers were actually created by Marika, what their purpose is, and how this changes our perspective of the game. As we know, the purpose of the Two Fingers is fourfold. Number 1, they spread the word of the Golden Order. 2, they choose the Empyreans that are candidates for godhood. 3, they empower great runes. And 4, they provide guidance to the people of the lands between, and more specifically, the tarnished upon their return from the Badlands. The first sparks within my theory crafting brain ignited when I saw the opening scene of the story trailer. Marika pulls what can be assumed are strands of the Elden Ring. We can assume this because it matches what were shown in the E3 announcement trailer when the game first was being released and announced. But also because it takes the shape of Marika's rune when she holds it overhead. It all seemed planned to me, as if Marika was told what to do by the greater will to become a god. And I started to wonder why the Two Fingers were needed if Marika was able to converse directly with the greater will. I began digging into the Two Fingers and realized that a lot of the details don't make sense for them to be created by the greater will. And in fact, it seems that they were a creation of Marika to spread her own plans and beliefs. Today, let's dive into the key evidence that the Two Fingers are of Marika and not the greater will. To get started on what will be a controversial note, I believe the greater will is an outer god that has taken power via Marika. While I acknowledge that a common reason this is dismissed is because the greater will is never outright referenced as an outer god, I would like to propose the idea that it's not depicted as an outer god simply because it's currently in power. While this in itself is not evidence of why the Two Fingers were created by Marika, I wanted to lay this foundation to support some later evidence. While we're on the topic of the greater will, I would like to highlight something that I thought was quite interesting. That being that other than the Elden Beast and the Erdtree, the only other beings related to the greater will, whether that's item descriptions, dialogue, is the Two Fingers. Which is interesting because they're such a stark contrast to one another. With, of course, the Elden Beast and the Erdtree being very corporeal and golden, and the Two Fingers feeling very visceral and physical beings, it doesn't seem to quite line up. In addition to the contrasting nature of the Two Fingers, let's also consider the location of the Two Fingers. The set we're most familiar with are located within the Round Table Hold, which itself seems to be housed within the Erdtree, as they burn simultaneously when you do finally ignite the Erdtree at the Giant's Forge. The only other standard location of Two Fingers is at the top of the Divine Towers. Both are equally odd placements for vessels of the greater will, considering that one is a creation of Marika with the intentions of providing a tarnished the ability to kill the Elden Beast, and by extension the greater will's access to the lands between. Of course, we know this because of Hugh's curse, and his dialogue referring to his task of forging a weapon to kill a god.
Use my masterpiece to slay a god. That's all I've lived for. And my promise to Queen Marika.
However, the Divine Towers are not as obvious, as it requires us to compare in-game designs to recognize that the Divine Towers were built collaboratively by the Fire Giants and the Ancient Astrologers. This can be seen by the matching design on the towers, the Sword of Night and Flame, and the Forge of the Giants. What's also interesting is that there's also two distinct references to the Fell God atop the towers. One being the pillars that surround the top of the towers, displaying a meteorite with 8 circles around them, which matches the Eye of the Fell God, but also the top of the tower itself has 8 pillars which contain these meteors, with a center which may have been a meteor before it was being replaced by the two fingers. I believe these towers were once used as astronomy towers for the astrologers to read the fates in the stars, as we know is common amongst Carians and Rhea Lucaria. While it seems unlikely that the Greater Will would place their vassals at the top of another god's tower, the repurposing of these towers does line up with Marika's behavior. She is commonly finding ways to either cover up past eras or integrating these past eras into her own, which in this situation would explain why the Divine Towers now have two fingers on them if they were a creation of Marika. Now let's get into some deeper speculation. This will have less physical evidence and will require us to question a little bit more about Marika's plans, her behavior, and in general, how the world of Elden Ring works. As we know, by the events of the Shattering, Marika decided to turn her back on the Greater Will, splitting herself, with her trying to break the Elden Ring and Radagon trying to mend it, and splitting the Elden Ring into multiple shards known as Great Runes. The first question becomes, why did Marika fall out with the Greater Will? Of course, the Knight of the Black Knives comes to mind as a cause. However, that seems to be the tipping point of her decision rather than the sole reason. I believe the true reason behind Marika's lost faith in the Golden Order and the Greater Will is that she discovers her fate, and that her fate is to fully transition and become Radagon. I know that does sound a little bit crazy, but I'd like to highlight the first scene of the DLC trailer again and recontextualize some of her lines of dialogue. In the first scene of the DLC trailer, when Marika holds the threads of the Elden Ring over her head, her hair seems to appear red, or at least be transitioning to red, and her body resembles more of a skinny man than a woman. I believe that this depicts her becoming a god, not only taking on Radagon as her other half, but also taking in the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring within her. Building on this, let's reflect on the dialogue Melina repeats to us in Marika's bedchamber.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both, mine other self.
In the past, it's been debated that this dialogue tells us that Radagon was not always a part of Marika. And while I do agree with that, we do know that at this point in time they were conjoined in the same body. Instead, I believe this line specifically tells us that she's aware Radagon is taking her over. By saying, thou art yet to become me, she isn't saying Radagon is not yet a part of her body, but rather that he has not yet taken her over. Naturally, she wants to stop this before it happens, resulting in her shattering the Elden Ring and being imprisoned within the Erdtree. How does this relate to the two fingers, though? Well, as already discussed, the two fingers are responsible for guiding the Tarnished and choosing Empyreans. Both of these are very interesting when we dig deeper. Starting with the Tarnished. We know that Marika has the ability to place or remove grace from beings within the Lands Between. We also know that Marika planned for the Tarnished to leave the Lands Between, die, and then attempt to become Elden Lord, serving as Marika's backup plan after having their grace returned. This is told to us by Melina in the Third Church of Marika and the Church of Pilgrimage.
Very well. In Marika's own words, my lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between. Wage war. and brandish the Elden ring. Grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey.
With the return of the Tarnished, we realize that out of all the Two Fingers, the only living set exists within the Round Table, which itself is assumed to be within the Erdtree, where Marika resides. Then, when we consider that these fingers specifically support and guide the Tarnished, who are part of Queen Marika's plan, it seems strange that the Greater Will would continue offering guidance to the Tarnished. Another interesting point to note is that the Two Fingers need to consult with their creator when we're unable to access the Erdtree due to Radagon's thorns. Again, it seems strange that this would surprise the Two Fingers, given that the Erdtree is a creation of the Greater Will. In this situation, if we change perspectives and assume the Two Fingers were a creation by Marika, both of these scenarios make a lot more sense. If Marika created the Two Fingers, it would make sense that the ones located within the Erdtree that are still able to commune with her would continue living, while the others that are disconnected would die. Of course, if the Two Fingers were creations of Marika, it also makes sense that they would continue supporting the Tarnished, and also why they're surprised when we're barred entry from the Erdtree. Marika is aware that she's crucified and imprisoned within the Erdtree, but she's unaware that Radagon has also sealed the entrance with thorns, which explains why they would be confused with us not being able to enter, and would then look to Marika for answers. That brings us to the discussion of the Empyreans. Empyreans are a very interesting topic within Elden Ring. There seems to be only one written rule for being selected as an Empyrean. That is, to be chosen by a set of Two Fingers. Of course, this is strange, considering there are only 3 Empyreans noted for the current age, those being Miquella, Malenia, and Ranni. This is interesting because, of course, we know that there are a total of 7 sets of Two Fingers, with Godric, Radahn, Rykard, and Malenia all having their own Two Fingers, while Mohg, Morgott share a set, and the Tarnished also share a set. This, however, is where it gets more interesting. When we look at the demigods that were chosen as Empyreans, a neat trait appears. Each of the Empyreans chosen would result in the removal of the Greater Will's control upon becoming a god. The most obvious is Ranni and her Dark Moon. This is an ending we see in-game, with dialogue from Ranni specifically mentioning that she and her order will be separated from the lands between, and they will give the denizens of the world their own free will. Then, the next most obvious is Malenia, and the influence that the god of Rot has on her. The Rot god is clearly referenced as an outer god that was previously worshipped by the Mushroom Lords and the Kindred of Rot, but Malenia becoming a god would then bring the god of Rot into power over the Greater Will. Finally, we have to speak about Miquella and his Order of Unalloyed Gold. This is why I laid the foundation of the Greater Will being an outer god that's just currently in control. It makes Miquella's status as an Empyrean make a lot more sense in this context. Miquella's order wishes to see the removal of the influence of outer gods, while the main consideration, of course, is that Miquella wants to cure his sister Malenia. The other unintended consequence would be the removal of the Greater Will. And that's why those 3 Empyreans were chosen. I believe that Marika is aware of the Greater Will being an outer god, as she was the one who assisted in bringing it into power, much like Malenia or Ranni would do for their god of Rot or Dark Moon. Therefore, she knows that the power of the Greater Will can be removed, and the Two Fingers were created to allow her the ability to influence the demigods that would bring down the Greater Will. Throughout the game, we get pieces of information and hints that show how Marika plans and schemes to get the best outcome for herself, which is why it's no surprise to see how the Two Fingers fit into this narrative. This alternative perspective recontextualizes a lot about how the game plays out, We're no longer following the plans of the greater will, but are instead pawns in Marika's plan. Looking at the game from this lens, it seems that Marika's overzealous struggle for power led to her overlooking the risks that were lining her actions. It's a fitting story of how Marika was struggling to control the natural order and the lives of others, then having her own will taken away, leaving her with the decision of being taken over completely by Radagon, or sacrificing herself, her order, and the world she created to release that world from the control of the greater will. I think this story is a fitting character arc for Marika, and I hope we learn a lot more about her motivations and decisions in the DLC. Thank you all for joining me. See you in the next one.